Welcome to Beekeeping Today podcast, your source for beekeeping news, information, and entertainment. I'm Jeff Ott.
And I'm Kim Flatham.
Hey Kim, happy anniversary. Not only did we get to celebrate Pollinator Week, we can also celebrate our first year of doing the podcast. I'm looking forward to this show recounting the highlights of our past 12 months and the 31 episodes of doing the Beekeeping Today podcast.
Yeah, the other day when you said, let's celebrate our 1-year anniversary, I got to thinking it has been a year and it went pretty fast for all things considered.
Yeah.
Let me back up a half step first though, Jeff. One is, have you recovered from Pollinator Week yet? That was a sort of a marathon session and some last minute digging and making things work and pulling them out of your hat. And I think you did a good job of making all of those things work at the last minute. So,
well, thank you.
From where I sit, kudos. Good job.
Well, it was a bit of a scramble on a couple cases, more than I thought we would, but I'm glad we got the job done, and much to the thanks of the flexibility of our great guests.
I wanted to bring up something else, Jeff, and for the people listening, I'm going to guess after a year, our voices are pretty well known, but you kind of came out of the dark here when we got started here, and for the people listening who don't know who you are or where you came from, give me a 5 or a 4 minute background of who you are, where you came from, and why we're doing this, just so that they know. I know, but give them a little bit of background if you would.
Well, sure. Well, I guess I'm a product of very patient parents, mom and dad, and they had 4 boys, and in the household we always had all sorts of kinds of dogs and cats and skunks and squirrels and snakes and parrots and frogs and toads and mice and rats to feed the snakes and tarantulas, and even one time we had an armadillo. So I guess it's not too unusual. At some point during the line, I was doing the Uncle Milton ant farms and went from the small Uncle Milton ant farm to the large Uncle Milton ant farm, and that led to my desire to learn more about the honeybee. So somewhere, I don't know, maybe around 6th grade or so, I picked up, my parents and my dad helped me buy and build an AI root observation hive. And we went down to a local beekeeper there. I think he's in Parma, off of West Pleasant Valley Drive or Road now. And filled the observation hive. I took it home. I set it up on my desk in my bedroom, and with the tube going out the window, and that became my real love affair with the honeybee. So that was early on. Unfortunately, of course, that observation hive swarmed and eventually died out in the fall. But it was a great learning experience. And it wasn't until later after college, and I was living there in Hinckley, that I got my first several hives, and I bought established hives from some old timer. A buddy helped me move them late at night. I think that's when I learned that you have to, it's best to remove the full honey supers before moving a hive. But hey, we all learn. Still learning today, in fact. Anyways, so then at that time, that would have been about 88, 89, and I was going down to the AI Root outlet store and going through the factory seconds and picking up all sorts of great woodenware for a real inexpensive price. So I think I reached out to you in early 90 or late 90 or so and said, hey, I want to write an article for you, and I somehow we batted it around a little bit, and we came up and did, my first article for you was published in February of 1991, and it was called Packaged for Success, and it followed the creation and delivery of a package of bees, and I worked primarily with Reggie Wilbanks in Georgia on the creation of that article. It was lots of fun, and it wasn't too long after that I started writing under the column of The Weekender, as a beekeeper who worked during the day and only had time for the bees on the weekends.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Well, the other thing, Jeff, was that you became part of the Medina County Beekeepers Association. And actually, you started the first newsletter that they had called the Bee Herder.
The Bee Herder.
The Bee Herder's still going. And so your legacy continues in that respect here in Medina.
I love that name, the Bee Herder. I remember doing that. And actually, I was working at Society National Bank. It was then Society National Bank, and I remember. I guess statute of limitations has run off, but at that time it was a paper newsletter, and we'd send it out, and so I remember running off the newsletter off on the Society National Bank Xerox machine. So
I didn't hear where that was, Jeff. I won't tell anybody.
We can bleep that out, right?
Okay. Well, that was yes. I think that's kind of where we started running into each other, was at the Medina County meetings.
Yeah. The
newsletter started, and then you got more involved with writing, and it went from there locally. And then you moved. Where did you move to?
Yeah, I moved to northern Colorado, to a small town called Berthoud. It's between Fort Collins and Boulder. And shortly after I moved there, you sent me down to McAllen, Texas, to the Weslaco Bee Lab, where I spent several days in the area talking with Dr. Anita Collins at the time, and went out to Hidalgo, Texas, with a bee tech who showed me where the Africanized bees first came across the Rio Grande. Then met some other people in the area. Then went down, met up with Dr. Hoopengardner and Dr. Taylor, Dr. Roger Hoopengardner and Dr. Chip Taylor. Went to their lab in Linares, Mexico, if I remember that right. Followed them around for a couple days, taking pictures, getting their story about the research that they were doing on the Africanized bee and the hybridization of the Africanized bee as it mixed with the European bee in the area. And I learned a lot of respect and found it quite a bit of fun, actually.
Africanized bees and fun. Two words you seldom hear in the same sentence.
No, and I learned, I gained a lot of respect for the Africanized bees during that visit. It was pretty phenomenal. And at that time, that was the big threat facing American beekeepers. That's what we had to deal with. I mean, we had tracheal mites. But those seem to be somewhat manageable. But the big threat looming on the horizon, and for those at that time down in Texas and in Florida, were the threat of the Africanized bees, and that was what we were writing about at that time.
You ended up in Washington. Then you're out in Olympia now.
Yep.
And that's when we got kind of back together. I think you were back in Medina visiting, and you stopped in one day, and you had this proposal for doing the podcast.
Yeah, well, we had. So yeah, that's kind of turned around to get there. When I left Colorado, I sold all my bees, and because I just didn't want to try to keep bees in the Pacific Northwest. The just did not seem like it would be the thing to do. Varroa was starting to come on strong in we moved here in 2004. So the Varroa was coming on strong and coming into the Pacific Northwest with the cool, damp, wet area. And I just said, that's just seems like I don't want to put my bees to that kind of weather and be responsible for them. So it took me a while to get into bees. And once I did, I said, well, I've got to start writing for Kim again. And so I reached out to you, and we were batting around some ideas for articles. And I pulled up some articles I had started, didn't finish. And then when I was visiting family in Ohio, Sherry and I stopped in and said, and you said, well, what about that article you're working for me? And I said, well, forget the article. What do you think about a podcast? And that's how we started on this. That was, about 13 months ago.
Well, it's a good story, and a road well traveled. We're glad you made it. So
mostly one piece. Well, I want to step back here real quick. During the time when I was in Ohio, it was '93 that you asked me to go with you to the American Beekeeping Federation meeting in Kansas City, and there on the very first day, you introduced me to someone who was working at the National Honey Board, and her name was Sherry Jennings. And I have to tell you, it was love at first sight, and we've been together ever since. We were together 21 years and finally got married. It'll be 5 years ago. So, yeah, it was. So you introduced me to Sherry, and that I'm thankful for.
It took you 21 years to get married?
Yeah, well, it's a long story.
Never mind. So a year ago we started this, and I think we were talking earlier today about just kind of going over some of the highlights of the last year.
Yeah,
some of the people that we've talked to. We've talked to some, I want to say historic, but certainly people in the industry that have made their mark or left a mark, and they have now moved on, and we've still got them on tape. So. It goes back to the first one was Amber Barnes. I don't know if you remember Amber or not.
Yeah.
She was the pollinator protection person who was working here in my pollinator garden at the time. And I was just up there the other day. Amber, if you're listening to this, it needs some weeding. But we've done a couple of those with her up there. And then we moved on to, well, we did one with a couple with Jim too for a while. Tony Burnham, our urban beekeeping person for the magazine we worked with, she had a lot of good things to say about keeping bees in the city. And in fact, Jeff, we're going to kind of go back to that. I'll just interlude here for a second. Mm-hmm. With the other things that we do with Jim too, and I do with the Kim and Jim show, we're going to be out in his bee yard, and Jim just found out that a big suburban development is going up right next to his house and his bee yard.
Oh no!
And and we're going to be taking a look at that. Coming up here, not very far from now. What are the liability issues and water and all of the things that he's going to have to deal with now? Moving bees, the fence is good, but bees, just fly over fences pretty much. So that's part of Tony's problem. Tony's program was working with urban beekeeping. We had Tom Theobald and his issues with neonicotinoids, and we're still going to get back to him, weren't we?
Yeah, we wanted to get back to him, talk a little bit more about the neonicotinoids and the other work that he's involved in. We
also had a good talk with Dan Conlon on the Russian bee program. And I've always had kind of a soft spot for the Russian bee program, basically because of their resistance to Varroa and the management issues that come about because of their basic pattern. They're late to wake up in the spring, which is good because so am I. I'm always on the road early in the spring, and they don't start going until May or so, and that's about when I get home. So I've always had kind of a soft spot for them, and the fact that where they do well, they do really well. So it was good to talk to Don, and then Bill Hesbach and his bee talk. And I don't know if you've seen that. We've got that going here in Medina. We opened up a bee talk here in Medina, and it's just a place where people come once a month, sit around, talk, ask questions. We go out and work our bees every time that the weather permits, and have ended up having a good time because of the door he opened with all of that. And then, of course, there's Sam Ramsey. We were able to get him early on, and I think his fat body talk, his fat body work was exceptional. You remember that discussion we had with him?
Yeah, we were lucky to get a hold of Sam Ramsey, and before he went off to, where is he going, to Thailand?
I believe, yeah.
Yeah, and I think he's there now. He did get his grant after, and, we can take credit for him, getting his grant after being on our podcast. And so he's there doing the research on a triple ellipse mite, if I'm getting that correct, which is expected to be the next major threat against the honeybees in the United States.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoyed working with him, he was at EAS last summer, and I was able to catch him. And if you haven't seen his display on or his program on YouTube, call up his name because he's an excellent spokesman, but he's also an excellent showman, and his music abilities almost defy description because he is so good at what he does. So you put those two together, and then you bring in the groundbreaking research that he did. He was a pretty fantastic show, I think.
He's really bright.
I'm glad we were able to catch some of that.
Yeah, you bet.
And then of course, one of the fatalities along the road, we had Shane Gabauer talking on treatment-free beekeeping, and as you know, Brushy Mountain ran into some issues this year, and they had to close their doors, but we still got Shane. So if you want to hear about treatment-free beekeeping, you can tune in and catch Shane talking about that. He had some good things to say about that sort of approach to dealing with varroa mites.
Yeah, that was kind of surprising. I mean, Shane was on the show with us, and then I think within several days after the release of the podcast, it was the announcement about Brushy Mountain. So that was kind of a surprise, and he was able to have a great conversation on the treatment-free beekeeping, and with all of that going on, I'm sure it was very tumultuous in his life, all of that going on. So we're fortunate to have him on at that time.
We were, but the result of that business venture closing its doors has really changed the picture of the beekeeping industry in the U.S. in terms of who's selling what to who. They sold out their equipment, and a lot of their existing equipment was bought by Man Lake, and then Man Lake, of course, bought Kelly last year. So now that is one big operation. They own a big chunk of if you want to buy it, where are you going to get it? And they've got a loud voice in the market right now. Well, the change in the industry is still evolving, and who's going to end up doing what, where, when, and why. Other people are coming into the scene, are just beginning to show up, and new voices are out there. So sitting back and watching is actually a lot more comfortable than having to be on a day-to-day basis with this, I think.
Well, I was going to ask you, relatedly, I remember way back when the Root Company got out of the beekeeping equipment, and I wasn't there for it, but I remember you telling me about the day that they auctioned off a lot of the original frame making and hive body making equipment from AI Root, and I think you said like Jack Thomas was there. There's other peoples from the big beekeeper suppliers buying some of this equipment, their manufacturing tools. Is that something you can speak to?
It was an interesting day in the history. That too was an interesting day in the history of beekeeping. The Root Company was to the point where they were bouncing back and forth. Are we going to expand our beekeeping business? The candle part of their business was growing at exponential rate, and they were looking at which direction do we go. We really don't want to divide our resources and go two directions right now. We want to be able to focus on what we can do best. The beekeeping part of the business had aged, and the equipment that they had pretty much all needed upgrading, whereas the candle equipment that they were using was all brand new. And there was kind of an easy choice. I'm sure it was not for the family, but it was an easy choice in terms of a business decision. Where do we go? Every candle we make, and we can't make enough of them, is selling it at the moment. And right now, the beekeeping business is beginning to be a harder business to be in. There were more people selling equipment. There was varroa mites were challenging beekeeping everywhere. Tracheo mites were challenging. The price of honey was challenging. Looking down the road, 5-10 years, the company said, I think perhaps candles is a better choice for us right now, and we'll see what it holds. Fortunately for me, they kept the magazine. And
Yeah, definitely.
so that too has continued to be a voice. But and interestingly, kind of related to that, earlier on we had Brad Root come in here talking about the first 50 years of the Root Company, and he's coming back next week and going to talk about the second 50 years of our 150-year anniversary. So he'll be here talking about what went on then, and that was as the company matured and the industry matured. It'll be interesting to see how things fell together, and the Root Company, I'm not going to say took advantage, but was able to take advantage because they were one of the first ones there. Them, of course, and Daydance were the two companies to deal with, and how they worked back and forth and the directions they went. So I'm looking forward to listening to Brad talk about that one.
That was episode 17. That seems like just yesterday, but it was a little bit ago. It was December that was released. Of
course, just after him, we had Tom Seeley, and talking about on his new article on bees in the wild, his new book, Bees in the Wild. And I think you had a chance to read that book, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Prior to Dr. Seeley being on the show, I had read the Honeybee Democracy, and after he was on the show, I read the beelining book.
Hunting Wild Bees.
Hunting Wild Bees. Thank you. And then just a couple weeks ago, I just received his latest book. So he's fun to read. I'm enjoying his books and the passion he writes about honeybees. It's a good perspective.
Interestingly, he has an article out today, or at least I ran into it today. It's brand new, and he is looking at the situation where colonies are in close proximity to each other. Some of them are crashing from mites. Others are healthy, but suddenly everybody's crashing from mites. And what we've been calling it is a mite bomb, where a crashing colony, the bees and the mites on them leave and then go and infect other colonies. And he's kind of turned that around in that it's the crashing colonies aren't expelling bees and mites. What they are doing is being robbed by healthy colonies, bees from healthy colonies that are nearby, and they in turn then are being infected by mites in the process of robbing and then bringing them back home. And he's got a kind of a new term, a robber, looking at that. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes. He has colonies 2 and 3 miles away that were found to be. He was using yellow bees and dark bees as his distinguishing characteristics, and finding out where those bees went, how far they went, and what they, how much trouble they were causing as that colony was crashing. So is it a mite bomb, or is it a wee colony being robbed? Long-term, short, doesn't make much difference. The mites no more. The mites are everywhere anyway. So
yeah.
But that he came out with that was also interesting just now.
Interesting. Is that a published article? Where
it's in PLOS One.
All right.
And if you're familiar with that, you can probably just go to PLOS One and Google Tom Seeley's name, and it'll come up. It's brand new. And I don't have the paper here in front of me, or I would give you the title. But
we'll get it up in the show notes. So if anybody wants to look it up.
Yeah. Next, we had Reed Johnson from here in Ohio talking about some of the pesticides that were being used in almonds, and some of the things that were going on that people weren't even aware of that were causing problems for bees out there. That was eye-opening, and it was nice to see a guy from Ohio solve a California bee problem. So I kind of enjoyed that, and then of course Eric Winger with True Source Honey. And that has turned out to be a pretty popular program. And where does honey come from, really? And does it really come from there? Was the questions that they were answering. So it was good to get the background on that.
That was really good podcast, and it was great to see the work that the True Source and True Source Honey is doing, and providing that audit trail back to the original beekeeper who provided that honey for the producer. So I thought that was a really interesting podcast.
Back in March, we talked to Peter Nelson, who did the Pollinator movie. Have you heard more about that since then?
I follow him on Twitter, and I know he listens to the podcast. Hey, Peter. And I know he's in the middle of all the film festivals, so he's out and about. And if you recall, Davey Hackenberg mentioned that they were going to be in I think, College Station, or going to be showing the movie, not too far from where Davey lives. So, and of course, Davey's in the movie. So, yeah, he's still out there working with the movie. I hope he does more with bees. He did some fabulous photography in that movie.
If you haven't had a chance to catch the movie yet, I'm sure you can just Google the name, The Pollinators with Peter Nelson, and find out where it's going to be playing. And if you get a chance, go, because there's a lot of good information in there. And as you said, the photography was stunning for that.
Yeah.
Showing what the beekeepers are going through, but what the beekeepers are looking through a windshield at dawn. Yeah. It may sound kind of weird, but it's part of the attraction of moving bees is the scenery you get to see going by. What did you think of Jonathan Lundgren? I know you didn't know him before we started.
Yeah. Looking back, I mean, we've had a lot of great guests. All of our guests have been great guests, but Jonathan Lundgren was one of my favorite, I think, in terms of learning a lot about soil and the importance of soil in agriculture. I think I will just dump myself in the same bucket of many Americans, is that soil is pretty much something you walk across on your way to get from point A to point B, and I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought. And to hear him describe the importance of soil health and the microbial importance of the microbial health of soils, and how that drives and feeds everything else in agriculture was really enlightening for me. And I say this with my niece being a soil doctor down at the University of Georgia in Athens. So I'll be going to, I have to apologize to her at the next family gathering. But I found it was really, I liked him. He had a lot of good things to say.
He's been busy since he was on our show. He's been on the speaking tour, and people are beginning to listen to him. He's got some good research projects going on this summer, and I hope we can get him back this fall and talk more about what he's been doing. Coming from a horticulture background, I really appreciated what he had to say and the work that he's doing, and I hope that he's able to convince a lot more people that the direction that he's going on, which is diverse crops and intercropping and all of those sorts of things, is a much better way to go than monocropping corn and soybeans.
Yeah. It was the other memorable thing about his podcast was he was sitting in his house during a podcast during a snowstorm. So it was quite an eventful time for him, and it kind of, I think it impacted the sound quality. I do remember that was one of the first podcasts we had to put a little blurb in front saying apologizing for the sound quality, but it was due to the snowstorm. I don't think we actually mentioned that part during the show, but yeah, it was quite really interesting.
And this year, the corn and soybean plantings have been dramatically affected by the weather. So it will be fun to see what people are able to do to prevent plant acres that are going in at light. It'd be really good to see people putting in some cover crops that are beneficial to not only the soil, but to bees and other pollinators and everybody that lives out there, all of the animals and birds and what have you. Well, then there was Meredith May, and the history that we had with her back in, I want to say it was 91. She had an article in our magazine, and I hadn't been here all that long, and it was a good story. She's a good writer, and it turned out to be a remarkable event in her life. It got her into writing for a living, and she became a journalist. Was close to a Pulitzer Prize, but she ended up living with her grandfather, who was a beekeeper, and extracted his honey on an old abandoned school bus, or I guess it was an army bus.
Army bus, and
that was her story, the honey bus. She was fun to talk to.
It's a good book too.
Then we had Jeff Williams. Interestingly, Jeff was when we had him, he was just getting ready to take the BIP, the Bee Informed Partnership Survey, him and his crew.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've got those numbers. They just came out here like a week or so ago. I think the numbers were somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40% loss this year.
Yeah, 37 point something or other, but yeah, it was nearly 40%.
So it was not a good year for bees and beekeepers, apparently. What I noticed, of course, what I was looking at, it was not only the final numbers, but I was also looking at the number of participants and the number of colonies that they represent, because the more people you get counting bees, the better your data is going to get. And the data keeps getting better every year. And I was impressed with this year, the number of people and the number of bees, and unfortunately, the number of colony losses.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's the best measure we got. And as long as they keep doing it and it gets a little better every year, at least we've got a picture out there of what's going on. And it's not getting a lot better.
I think I agree. It's the more that the data collection improves, the quality of data collection, I think we'll find more sobering numbers.
Yeah. Dr. Jerry Bromanchenk and Dr. David Firth.
Speaking of electronic gathering of information.
The Songs of Bees. It was, I thoroughly enjoyed that show, talking about the things that he's got going. Bees in the U.S. having a different dialect in the sounds they make than the bees in Australia. And then my iPhone having a different dialect than the Android that you're using, listening to those songs of bees. And my challenge is still out there, Jerry. I want to see a dictionary of the songs that bees are singing out there and what they're telling me. But what a breakthrough. And I was just amazed. And apparently his fundraiser did quite well. He was chasing dollars to finish the research, and it sounds like it worked.
Yeah, I was just looking at the website, and they had over 600, as of the day of this recording, they've had only over 653 backers with a total pledge of over $28,000. So he was only looking for significantly less than that, I think, just to get it started. And we'll have to get him back on the show to give us an update on the app and the development and how things are going for the Bee Guru app.
You can play some more of those songs for us. It would be good to hear. Yeah, well, congratulations, Jerry. I think it's a well-deserved project, and I want to see it be even more successful. I want to know what bees are telling me when I go out there, other than they're queenless or you shouldn't be here today because it's raining. So, getting close to winding up here, Pollinator Week.
Yep, that was
the rush.
Oh, I remember it well. Pollinator Week was fun. I like the total immersion in the topic and the bees and the cross section of people that we get on the show. They all did a fine job with starting with Kelly and Vicky from P2 and getting some history on the pollinator partnership and the beginnings of the Pollinator Week story.
Well, the other interesting part of that is a year ago, none of us knew what we were doing. And this year we actually kind of did, or at least a little bit more so. Excuse me. We had Kelly and Vicky, and they were talking about the Pollinator Partnership Program and the Bee Friendly Farming Program and the things that they've got going. And I've just recently got hooked back up with the Bee Friendly Farming, so that was good to chat with them. And then there was the people that were in some of those movies that you were talking about. Davey Hackenberg, an East Coast commercial pollinator, and the way that the East Coast pollination business kind of runs. He isn't doing almonds. He's making honey in Florida in the winters, and that's getting tough. And apples are tough, and it's not an easy way to make a living on the East Coast.
No, it was really, you could really hear the passion, frustration, challenge, that he felt as being a commercial beekeeper today. I mean, he kept referencing to the 15 years ago, and we know about that, but actually having to live it is knowing one thing and living something is completely different. And you could hear it in his story. Yeah, that's a hard row, I think.
Yep. It was good to see that his outfit's doing well with honey, though. Keeping other beekeepers going by buying their honey and reselling it, so that I don't have to. I've got a market. I'm a small scale beekeeper. I got a market for my honey, and local honey is being able. U.S. honey is being made available to people. So it's good to see that's working for them, and I hope that continues. And the pollination part of it. Oh, I tell you, cranberries are tough, blueberries are tough, apples are tough, and then you got to go to Florida, and you got poison in the water, and it's got to be hard to get out of the bed in the morning sometimes, I think.
Yeah, I agree. There used to be the belief that you could overwinter in the Florida orange groves, and Davey said that they're yanking those out, and there's getting less and less, fewer and fewer places for beekeepers to keep their bees during the winter. And dealing with that on a day in and day out seasonal basis would be challenging.
And then they got problems with the mosquitoes down there. So like I said, they put poison in the water. So it just, if it's not one thing, it's something else.
Yeah.
It's always, Dr. Zeruda was fun to listen to. She's just getting started at the University of Tennessee, coming just early this year from Clemson.
Yeah.
So what she was doing at Clemson, she's kind of moved to Tennessee with her, and she's just getting up to speed. But she's got some good things. She's 100% extension, so the teacher, and she's getting some of the local beekeepers going on Master Beekeeper program, but at the same time, some of the farmers there with her pollinator gardens and pollinator work.
Yeah, I was talking to her after the show as we're getting things squared away, and she has the extension opportunities for her down there are pretty big in terms of education and getting to know their specific challenges in Tennessee. Eastern Tennessee is different from Western Tennessee, and there's not much north and south difference, but east and west is different, and the extension offices are different levels of exposure and knowledge of honeybees within the extension offices. So she's got her work cut out for her, but I can't think of anybody who has more energy than she does to tackle those problems.
Yeah, she's got her hand in a lot of fires down there, and she's got a lot of. During the show, we were talking about some of the photography that she does. She's an excellent photographer, and how to use photography when you go out to a bee yard. What kind of data do you take? And does a picture is worth 1,000 words sometimes? And she's talking about that. So. You get a chance to listen to Jennifer's show. She did a good job.
The one tip that she had, I think, is really valuable, whether you're taking pictures of bees or your kids, is set the timer on your phone so that for 3 seconds, so you can set it up, hit the button, and hold the camera real still, and you can get a really good solid picture that way, as opposed to taking a picture while you're trying to move the camera around. So if you're wanting to take pictures of your bees, that's a solid tip from Jennifer, is set the timer for 3 seconds or 10 seconds and set up the shot and do it. It's good.
She and I were at a meeting, I want to say it was in Georgia earlier this year, and she talked about that trick during her talk, and I've been using it ever since, and it really does make a difference. Yeah. So if you're into taking close-ups of bees, you can get those little close-up lenses that she uses of $15. I mean, they're almost free. You don't have to get up nose to nose with a bee. You can get up almost nose to nose with a bee and get a good close-up picture. And with a timer, you don't get the jiggling and things. So, kind of a bonus with her. That was a bonus, because I was expecting the pollinator thing, and up comes the photography thing. So we got 2 for 1 there. And then there was Jean Brandy.
Yeah.
Did you know Gene before we talked to him?
Yes. Yeah. So yes, from work and long ago when at the Honey Board and also with American Beekeeping Federation, and knew him from both of those organizations and meeting him at different meetings.
He's sitting in a pretty good location in his part of California down there. He, one of the few migratory pollinators that I know that gets to eat both breakfast and supper at home every night. Yeah. Because he only has to go just down the road almost always. Of course, he's on the road a little bit, but almost always his jobs are, I can see it from here almost.
Yeah.
And so it's a way different kind of business than Davey Hackenberg out on the East Coast. And even a lot of the people who have to come to California and get spread out there, he's there all of the time. And it's just down the road for this crop, over the hill for that crop, across the field for this crop. And I make it sound real easy, Gene. I know it's not.
Well, it is different. I mean, it's a different perspective of a working commercial beekeeper who's successful in his business, and he and his brother. But contrast him with his brother or John Miller, who is another California beekeeper who is more migratory in the Davey Hackenberg sense, that he spends John Miller spends half his year in Gackle, North Dakota, and half the year back in California, just chasing the bloom. So it's two different perspectives of the same of being a commercial beekeeper out of California. It was a fun interview. I enjoyed Gene's talk.
It was good, and I look forward to talking to him again later this year if we can get him back on. You mentioned John Miller, and one of the things that I wanted to mention, we didn't mention, we talked to him earlier last year also, but
episode number 2, if I recall properly.
There you go. John Miller is one of the leading advocates for indoor wintering, and he's the scientific side of indoor wintering. There's a group of people that are beginning to explore that. I really want to get back and talking to him on how this is set up, how the buildings work, the environmental controls, the policies at borders that are changing because of this. It is the next step. It's the future of beekeeping, I think, rather than heading to Southern California and being a commodity crop down there feeding, or heading to Florida and running into the problems that Davey's running into. I think all of those things are evolving as we speak, and it's interesting to watch and to talk to the people that are kind of on the front of making some of these changes. And that brings us up to the last one we did, Jeff.
Yep. Yeah, that was a fun one. I was a little nervous. Talking to Adam, because with his history on NPR and also now currently with Bloomberg Environmental, talking to someone who's a professional broadcaster, and we have our year-old podcast going. So I think having him on the show, it was really interesting, especially after having him on the show after him doing the Business of Bees series of podcasts on Bloomberg Environmental, gave a different perspective to the commercial beekeeper picture than we've been able to give in the last 12 months. It's an outsider's view.
Yep, he was coming at it from the perspective of someone who didn't know a lot, talking to people who didn't know a lot, and of course, you and I take things for granted sometimes too often. And when we're talking to people, we know what they know, and we just move on. Where he doesn't know those things, and they have to explain them to him. So you get in a lot of ways, a better picture of how the business is working. Certainly, a different picture than when people already don't know what you're going to say next. So, if you haven't yet, Bloomberg Environmental, it's a six podcast series. Tune it in, because it's an eye-opening series of podcasts that shed light on some things that you don't normally hear about.
Yeah, it was a good series. I totally recommend it, especially to family members who aren't really all that excited about bees. It gives you When you sit down to talk to your brothers and sisters or nieces and nephews, and they don't want to really hear about all the nitty gritty, you can turn them on to that podcast, and it really lets them hear in 6 short podcasts the challenges facing the beekeeping industry today.
Yep.
Well done.
Yep.
Well produced.
So, one down. Are we going to do another one?
Well, I'm game, Kim. If you're game, I'm ready to. I think we kind of have a rhythm here going and know how we want to do it. We're learning a little bit more of the technology, and I think we're getting the listeners who are enjoying the show, friends of the podcast, and let's give it another shot. What do you think for the coming up? We have a couple here coming up in the next month or so, don't we?
Well, I know that we've got Brad Root, who's going to do the second 50, and I know you've been talking to some folks.
Yeah, so we've been talking with Cedar Anderson, and he's with Flow Hives with him and his son. They'd like to come on and talk about the Flow Hive and also a new educational program that they'll be rolling out here in the next couple months. So we have them on tap, and it's not a Flow Hive pun, but it's they're coming up here soon. We have there's a new movie coming out, a new documentary called Honeyland. That's coming out the end of July, and we'll have that podcast before the movie shows, and we'll talk to the producer and director of that movie as well.
The Flow Hive hasn't made a lot of noise in the U.S. since it came out. It's been popular, but it's also gotten a lot of attention. Some of it not as positive as you might like. So we're going to talk to those people, and they are going to be at EAS this summer in July. They're going to have a booth there. So if you want to go talk to the Flow Hive people, EAS is the place to go. And they've also got an educational program coming up that I'm not familiar with, but they want to share with us so we can catch part of that. And you mentioned Tammy Horn, and Tammy's book on the history of women in beekeeping certainly is part of it. But she also has another book coming out on the history of a lady who worked at the AI Root Company for her entire career. And we're going to talk about that book coming up too later this summer. So
the co-author on that book, don't you?
Yeah, the co-author of that book, of course, Susan Cole. Susan Cole was a lifelong worker at AI Roots Factory here in Medina. When she retired, she wrote an autobiography of her life in the factory. It wasn't wildly popular. It was mostly for family more than anything, but it was published. AI Root, as you know, wrote an autobiography when after his death it was released. So what we have done, Tammy and I have done, is taken a look at her autobiography and his autobiography, and we've chosen a few events that happened in the factory and in factory life and looked at them from the perspective of an employee, a female employee, way back then, and then the owner of the company, and how they looked at the fire and how they looked at the things that were going on in factories with women, with other employees at that time of the century. And it is a fascinating book.
Yeah, wow. Well, isn't that what you were telling me? You almost had no information on her, and what you bumped into
somebody at a beekeepers meeting who was a distant relative and had a boatload of pictures. So suddenly we've got a photographic history of her and her life, and of course we've got the root history and AI Roots life. So we're looking forward to that coming out too, and that'll, when Tammy's here, we'll be talking about that.
Well, that'd be great.
Jeff, it's been a fun year, and I look forward to working with you on the next year and the projects we've got going. I want to bring in one thing. I know that one of the things that you do when you're not doing podcasts and your regular job is that you ride your bicycle a lot, and a lot of times you're involved in events, working with your kids and other people where you're trying to raise money. And I know you've got one going right now. Tell me a little about it.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Over the weekend of July 20th and 21st, I am riding my bike over 200 miles to raise money for the Cleveland Clinic Cancer Research Foundation in a ride called Velisano. The ride itself starts at the Cleveland Clinic and winds its way down just east of Medina, by the way, to Worcester, the home of Bee Culture's contributor and our podcast guest, Dr. Jimmy Tu, and spends the night, then rides back, taking a different route to Cleveland, actually just west of Medina. We're circling you, Kim. As we discussed before we started recording, I've been reluctant to use our podcast as a platform for personal causes. However, because 100% of the money raised goes to cancer research, I think it is a worthwhile cause. And because cancer has its impact on every family across the globe, I am asking our listeners to go to the show notes and click on the link to my ride. And because every single dollar raised will help. It doesn't matter how much. $2, $5, $10, whatever you can contribute. Nothing is too small to lend help. So, yeah, thanks a lot for asking, Kim.
Sounds like a good program, Jeff, and thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
For
sure.
all that it gains. 200 miles on a bicycle, I'd have to take a car. That's not going to happen ever for me. But good for you, and keep it up.
Thanks. Yeah.
So I think that kind of wraps up Pollinator Week and the first year of Beekeeping Today podcast. I look forward to more of the same and a lot different.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a great first year of working together on the podcast. Thanks, Kim. Well, that about wraps it up for this show and for this season. Before we go, I want to encourage our listeners to rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download and stream the show. Your vote helps other beekeepers find us quicker. We want to thank all this year's sponsors for backing the podcast. Your support helps pay the bills and keeps us going. And finally, we want to thank you, the Beekeeping Today podcast listener, for joining us on the show. It is for you we are here. Do you have an idea for a podcast? Someone you'd like to hear? Someone who needs recognition for their contributions, either locally, nationally, or even internationally? Feel free to send us your suggestions, comments, and questions to questions@beekeepingtodaypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Kim. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Thanks. Keep in touch.
Thanks, I will. Bye-bye.